Hey everybody, and welcome to a Michael JPS Gaming video. Crikey. I just realized this isn't gaming. Okay, so hey everybody, and welcome to Michael JPS video. In this video, I'm going to be doing my research project. I'm going to be reviewing my PowerPoint slides that I must do for the subject of Rome in Britain. I chose this subject a couple months back, and I really enjoyed it, and so without further ado, let's get started. This first image here is of Roman soldiers attacking, I believe, the Dacians, but they're basically barbarians with nasty curved swords, as you can see. I just thought it was a very romantic and interesting and very good picture to start my slides off with, so let's get started. Okay, so Prelude to Rome in Britain. And in the background we can see that Romans building their fort up on their wooden fort up on an elevated area. Prelude. Okay, so Britain was invaded by Julius Caesar, and I'm going to add things in here that aren't necessarily in here, in the slides, that is. I'm not adding to history, obviously. Britain was invaded by Julius Caesar in the year 55 and 54 BC. This was before that many years before Christ. When he invaded, he found a very pagan island, because obviously Christ was not born yet, and they had no other way of knowing. They didn't have divine revelation, and they were barbaric, so they didn't have the logical equivalent of the Greeks. They weren't like the Greeks, so they were just barbarians. The Romans built Londinium, which is very much similar to modern-day London, actually, once they had occupied the Isle a century after the Julius invaded. So, actually, this, I approximated here. Under Emperor Claudius, Britain was incorporated into the empire in 43 AD when they occupied it and built Londinium. So that's, I just approximated that. And Londinium was actually burned. It got burned by a rebellion by the barbarian tribal woman leader known as Boadicea. And that she'll come up later, but it's important to note that it was burned. And then modern city of London wasn't built until later. Rome advanced the island and boosted its economy. Yeah, it did this, and we're going to go through this. We're going to go through how it did this. I'll just say, because Rome already had a good economy, that added to the island. Plus, they also, because of their technology, they also it also allowed them to cultivate the real rich part of the island as well. So, okay, Rome had a lasting impact by bringing Christianity to the pagan isle. This is more or less true, because we see that even though it's dwindled nowadays, in 2020 Anno Domini AD, however you want to say it, I think it's like 2,600 if you're a Jew, or who cares? Okay, so it's still Christian, very Christian. It's not Catholic, but it's Christian, so, except, yeah. So Rome protected the Isle for as long as its legions were stationed there, and this is very true. There were multiple Anglo-Saxon, actually, I know of one Anglo-Saxon attack or invasion on the island that was repulsed by the Romans, and then that was around in the 300s, so the 4th century. But once the Romans left, Britain was a little bit helpless, honestly. The Roman legions. The Romans had the strongest army in the world at that time. Now, this can be in the West. I should add, it was the strongest army in the West. I'm not a genius with the Eastern army, or with the Chinese or whatever, but I definitely know that they were formidable. But in the West, at least, and by the West I mean everywhere from basically Israel west, that was their region. Okay, so yes, they did have the strongest army in the world at that time, and if not by quality, definitely by quantity, because Rome had empire-wide, in an ancient era, they had 500,000 men, so 500,000 fighting units of men. In Britain alone, there were over 3 legions, each comprising of 6,000 men. So 6,000 fighting men. There were also more slaves and stuff, but that's the real number of how many soldiers there were. Rome also imposed its laws and taxes upon the British people, allowing these legions to be stationed there. It is true, when Rome occupied a place, they give you two options. Okay, fight us and become slaves, or don't fight us and become less slaves, and we'll tax you. And both they're basically equal, except one means more death, and the other means not as much death. So, naturally, not against the barbarians, but other people would choose the less bloody option. Okay. Britain received the best security of their time, along with the most technologically advanced army in the entire world. Yes, the Romans were geniuses for war. They perfected the ancient, I would say, and this is my opinion, I believe they perfected the ancient world equivalent of basically the best army in the world. Their armor was spectacular. It was light, so they could march. Their morale was very, very good in their height, and their helmets were amazing. More importantly, each soldier was, and this will come up, I'm not sure if I cover the fall of Rome, but I do make references in here, but their soldiers were very loyal to the empire. And this was before the age of generals starting to get more loyalty from their troops than to the empire. And so that's kind of what kept it going. These legions remained in Britain until 410 AD, when the legions were recalled to the mainland due to the threat of barbarian invasion. Yes, in 410 they had to abandon Britain, or retract, as some people would say. They had to retract from Britain because they couldn't hold it anymore. They were losing too much land in mainland Gaul because of the eastern push west. Some eastern aggressive tribes had pushed west and intermixed with some of the more peaceful tribes that had learned to settle on Rome's borders. And so this basically led to the threat of a rise in aggression from the barbarians, which meant barbarian invasion, which ultimately destroyed the empire. Unda Imperator Hadrianus. Okay, so that's Latin for under Emperor Hadrian. Under the rule of Emperor Hadrian, the choice was made to set Rome's borders and cease expanding. In the year 122 Anno Domini, in order to make Britain safe from outside threats, Hadrian, like a king, set out to Britain, where his first job was to build a wall 80 miles long to separate the Romans from the barbarians to the north. The barbarians to the north are commonly called Picts, but that's basically what they are. They're just barbarians in the north. And the north of the island, I should add. The north of the island is Scotland, so they're really talking about the barbarians that inhabit there. Because they're, as you can see, this is the, in the background, this is the picture of the one and only Hadrian's Wall, which still survives today, and you can walk along it, and it's pretty amazing if you think about it. It's not as good as the Great Wall of China, which was built like 100 years earlier, but its job was supposed to be a watch post. I'm not sure how great it was, but because it did get overrun multiple times, so I'm not sure if it failed its job, but that was in the 200s, I believe. So, while Rome was still in her height, which is, I'll just say, 117 AD is considered Rome's height, just that's how they are economically speaking, militaristically, and culturally. It was their golden age, quote unquote. Not the golden age of man, that's a complete different thing. So, it did make Britain safe while Rome was still here, and it did its best to do so. And I will admit that it did get overrun, as I just said, but all things, it was kind of like the Korean War. There was always pushes and then pushbacks. There was always offenses and then counter-offenses by the Romans. A lot of the island fluctuated between the barbarians to the north and the Romans to the south of the island. But the Romans, I don't believe they ever... They never gave up until 410 AD. The Druids of Britannia. Okay, so I switched to a different thing because I felt this one... to a different font, excuse me. Because I felt this was much more ominous. I shouldn't have chose light green, though, but who cares? Me. Okay. The Druids of Britannia were fierce foes. They were a warlike people who practiced human sacrifice. Yes, they do, and we'll cover that later, and it's really creepy. It's pretty creepy. The Druids were the highest class of barbarians. They had knowledge both to teach children and to teach war. So, basically, what this means is that some Druids would, probably the older ones, they'd probably teach the children, just pass down the knowledge of how to carve, etc., 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 all those ancient things, and then I presume the ones that were in their 30s or in their prime, quote-unquote, wiser than the 20-year-olds, not as old as the 40 and 50-year-olds, if any, but that's I would presume those would be the ones who would teach war. And by that I mean they are the most aggressive, they have the best capability. And so the Druids were really annoying to Britain because what's not mentioned here is that they actually harbored refugees that the Romans had. When the Romans occupied, some people would obviously escape, and then they would let these refugees in, and Romans had enough until the Romans decided to end the Druid threat with the absolute, complete, and utter destruction of the Druids. Okay, where's the text? There we go. Didn't realize I did that. I didn't mean to do that. Burn, baby, burn! Yes, and there's a picture of a burning barbarian village in the background. The Romans assaulted the island of Mana, which is, if I had a map of England, it's above Wales. Actually, yeah, that's perfectly where it was. It's between Wales and Scotland, somewhat close to the coast of Britain. So hopefully that will help the reader, or the listener, get a good idea of this. Okay, so they assaulted the island and they burnt the sacred Druids. They burnt the Druid sacred groves. Gosh, Michael. This destroyed the resistance of the Druids and allowed the Romans to remain safe in their homes in Britain. Yes, because legions, which is the standard, not the standard, but it's a unit of Roman militaries, they would be stationed there, and so obviously men don't live 500 years, or 200 years. Approximately 500 years. They don't live that long, so obviously they'd be getting new recruits and stuff every day, so while they were there, they'd live there, and maybe it would be pretty boring, but yeah. So they would live in Britain, and defend Britain. I already did this. There we go. Money, money, money. Yes. Okay. So that's just disclaimer here. That is not Britain in the background. Britain, I don't. It's not rainy enough. That makes perfect sense. But Britain did get super duper rich from multiple factors, which came from Rome. Okay. So the first one is the Roman roads allowed faster trade and travel on the island, and I should also say, it's not specified here because it also, as an empire, its economic capability was boosted by the Roman roads. So, having Roman roads all across the empire means that I could get, obviously, if I had a big enough wallet, I could get special silks from Byzantium, or Constantinople as it's later known, all the way to Londinium, or maybe even, now, obviously, as a soldier, maybe not, but maybe if there's a little town near Hadrian's Wall, I can possibly order that if, the fates align and a trading caravan comes through. But the idea is that it's possible, and it allowed small trade, or not small, actually, very big trade, between Gaul and mainland Britain. And we know they did this because we definitely know that they traded wine from Gaul and slaves from Britain after they conquered Britain. Okay, so the Roman army kept that trade safe and secure. So it's great to have a trade route, but if it's always getting plundered, that's bad because you lose money. So the Roman army doubly also kept the trade safe and secure, which allowed it to flourish. And third, the occupation of Gaul, I already said this, so that they traded that, but surprisingly, excuse me, I spoke wrong here, but not only did they do it when they were conquered, but even before Rome had occupied Britain, they were some of the more, I'm not going to say peaceful, but accepted in their minds from the Romans. Some of the tribes that wanted a little friendship from the Romans, so to say, they traded slaves from probably their conquests to Gaul in exchange for wine as well, and other goods. 4. The occupation of the Isle allowed the Romans to construct the only gold mine on the Isle, the Ogafu gold mine. Okay, so, early on in the world, like in the BCs, in 1200 or 1000, around that area, there was tin in Britain, and tin, to put it into perspective, is just as rare as uranium. And uranium is used to make atomic bombs. Now, this has to do, I'm tying this in, but it was very valued. And so, obviously, the Romans found that when they came here, if any was left. But gold, as we have found today, in a relation to that, there's as much gold. If you can lay a thin layer, and this is why it's so precious, a thin layer of gold across an entire football field, but it has to be a millimeter, or it's either a millimeter or a centimeter thick. And if it's a millimeter, then that's basically just paint, thick paint. And so that's why this gold mine was so valuable to the Romans. It was another piece of wealth that added on to their economy. And also to Britons when eventually the Romans retracted from Britain. Romano-British Christianity. Okay, so along with wealth, Christianity also came to the island, and this is just done. Missionaries, now that they have roads to travel, they can get to places. Now that they have safe boatways, they can take boats to different places. It just works. And so you have this big this empire of roads, of 50,000 miles of roads, and then 2,000 on the island alone. And it allows all these different missionaries that are Catholic to come to Britain and convert it from these pagan, evil ways into Christianity. It's pretty amazing if you think about it. So this painting in the background is of a Romano-British Cairo, and yes, that's how you spell Cairo. I was confused by it too. The only one found on the island. It was painted during the 6th century AD by the monk Gildas. Now, some people are going to say, but Michael, Rome retracted in 410 AD. That's the 5th century, or the beginning of the 5th century. More like basically 4th, but 5th for... Well, 5th century, the Anglo-Saxons did invade, but they hadn't completely wiped out, they hadn't turned it pagan, the island pagan again, basically. And so, there are still Catholic Britons on the island, and this was painted in the sub-Romano area of Britain. This was painted after the Romans left, but while the Roman effect, the influence of Rome was still here. And that's why I included it. The Roman civilizing process of the island that begun in 43 AD allowed the word of God to take root, going so far, so quickly, as to have a bishop of the island to appear at a church gathering at Arles in 314 AD, not pi. So, this is really significant, because Britain goes from this really small, kind of pagan, insignificant island to this big, maybe not huge, but to a church player who gets to attend meetings at Arles. And for those of you who don't know, it's Italy. Imagine Italy and then the top of Italy, and then go west until you hit the bottom of France. That's about where Arles is. Okay. Yeah, this is the creepy part. Flesh to touch. Flesh to burn. Very creepy. I added that side note because I'm not I'm not a maniac. It's just really creepy. And so is the picture. As portrayed behind the words, the pagans would burn humans in great, quote-unquote, wicker men. As you can see, it's a wicker man. This was usually done to criminals, but if there were no criminals, you know, you'd probably have to do rock, paper, scissors or whatever. That's a joke. Basically, yeah, they would take from the innocents. Basically, I'm not sure if you would volunteer, but I'm pretty sure you were chosen if there were no criminals as an innocent, and you'd get burned. Yeah. Not fun. Not fun at all. Really not fun. The pagans in Britain were led by the Druids. Once these were wiped clean, the practices in tow disbanded. Obviously, because the Druids were also the head of the religion as well. They were kind of like the wise men of Athens or whatever. Some pagans formed armies, some even led by women, here we go, which was unusual at that time. Because most women were considered to just not be, not have the fortitude to go through a war, and not to be able to endure it. But obviously this is a barbarian culture, so we're talking about a whole nother pizza pie here. Most notably, Boadicea, as I mentioned before. And she burnt Londinium to the ground because the Romans, they were taking care of the Druids. But she got really upset because, I'll just say before I read the conclusion, she got upset because the Romans had violated an honor pact between her tribe and the Romans started enslaving them, so the Romans don't like it when you burn down their things, because then they come back in 3 times as many, and they burn you. Not fun. Okay, conclusion of Rome in Britain. The Roman occupation of the island of Britain lasted more than 3 centuries, from its start in 43 AD. The Romans had forever changed the island's economy, religion, and safety. Roman security and laws allowed the island to trade and become prosperous. This prosperity came to the island along with Christianity, which bonded the people spiritually together. These 3 things left a lasting impact on the isle. These 3 things led to the formation of the British common law centuries later, and even eventually later led to the founding of the American legal system. Because Rome had set up a lasting impact with their 12 tablets. They set up law, and they said, here's our laws, obey them. And then Britain decided, okay, some of their laws are unjust, but what about Christianity? And then they took Christianity. They took the economy, which allowed them to flourish. They took the laws, the base laws, the idea of law from the Romans. And they took Christianity from God. And they combined these 3, and you have what would become the British common law, which would go through the Middle Ages, through the Renaissance, although it would change in the Renaissance, and it would set the foundation for the founding of the American legal system. Because if you think about it, all our laws in America are based on Christian Judeo culture. And so it's pretty amazing. And the idea that we have laws, probably from Rome. Or even though it's not the first idea, but it's the most, I would tend to say, widely used one. Because they had conquered a lot of territory, including Greeks. So obviously that got spread all over. So even the Greeks may have invented the idea of a law, it got spread all over the empire by Rome. Okay, so this is more of a bonus. This is the bonus. So, legends. Artorius Castus Rex. And that's just Latin for King Arthur. And I don't know what the Castus is. I think it's castle, maybe. I don't know. Along with Roman culture, some believe Rome brought certain men of legend to the island, one of which was Artorius Castus, who is thought to have been Arthur, or later King Arthur. It's most probable that if King Arthur did exist, it would have been also around the time the Romans were leaving the island. So probably 420 AD, possibly. And the Anglo-Saxon invasion. So that would push it a little farther. So maybe 500-ish. That's typically where it's put, but not always. Most likely, he did not exist, but some still would think that perhaps he did exist. And there's Excalibur in the background. The end! Well, I thank you all for watching this Michael JPS not gaming. But this is Michael JPS video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Have a great day, and thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all later. Bye!